All right, I'm gonna hold up my plate so everyone can see what we've made.
Yay!
Woo! Try not to let it fall over. It's beautiful in real life.
Mine is wilting as the moments tick on here, but it's holding up. I got too hungry earlier. I'm trying to not snack at 5, which is when I always want to have a giant snack of food and then eat dinner like an hour later. And so I just ate the chicken.
It's so good.
There are a bunch of girlfriends that are joining us tonight from different parts of the country, which I just think is so neat.
Oh, that's so cool. Wonderful.
Do you want to share the wine that you're drinking too, since it's all local?
Yes, the bottle is downstairs, but this is a Black Star Dry Riesling. I've been a big Riesling fan, really since I'd never really drank white wines until moving up to Start Bare Knuckle in 2009, and then was drinking the whites from up there. I was like, oh, I love these, because they're usually like more acidic. Then I grew up in a real like buttery Chardonnay household, like California Chardonnays, and I was like, this isn't for me, but I really like the ones from up north. So yeah, it's been a big Black Star family for a while.
So I'm drinking a Black Star also. It's the 2018 Sauvignon Blanc, and it's really nice and crisp, fresh. And it's actually the perfect complement to this meal, because I feel like they're, with all the, if anyone else made the salad from Why We Cook, it has really tart and herbal flavors, and then there's like the tartness from the tomatoes, but then there's some of the fat from the oil and the buttermilk, and this is a really perfect combo with it.
Oh, good.
And then I'm drinking Mabe Blanc de Blanc. I opened a bottle of bubbly.
Perfect.
All Michigan wines.
My favorite right now. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say, we'll get started. I just want to say hi to everybody. Welcome back. And welcome to our new friends. I'm Laura Tui. I'm the program coordinator at Leland Township Library, and we're so excited to have you all here. I'm representing all the Leland County libraries, and so you won't hear much from me tonight, but we're so excited to have Lindsay Gardner and Abra Barons here to chat with us. We all say welcome and hello. Hello.
Thank you so much for having me join your dinner series that has been happening for a month now.
Well, thank you for joining us. You know, it was funny, as Laura and I were sort of talking about the series we just wrapped up in February, I was thinking, like, you know, what are kind of, if we all sort of derive inspiration from other people and like watching a demo or having a new recipe, I was thinking about this series because it was so much about like, where do I derive inspiration from? And it's really like seeing what other people are doing and learning from them and reading cookbooks, but also just talking to other chefs, other women in their kitchens and things like that. And then it just made perfect sense to your book just published last week. And it's been so fun to flip through and to read through. For those of you who haven't had a look at it yet, this is the book. It's called Why We Cook. And it is a collection, just like a really, I don't know that I've ever seen a book quite like this, where it's a mixture of, you know, profiles of different women in the food world. It's just different questions that have been asked to them. It's recipes, it's cooking tips, it's life tips, it's all of those things. And so I just seemed like a really wonderful way to kick off kind of potentially a new series for us. And also just it's beautifully illustrated, and so it's very different from anything. I mean, I can't draw at all, and so sort of thinking through like how a book is created that is so different from the process that I went through with writing Roughage. So I just wanted to kind of start off a little bit and just ask if, and we'll just have this, just so everybody knows, this is going to be just a really informal kind of question and answer and just chatting. It's really a conversation. And then if you have questions as well, you can them into the chat function. Unlike the previous series, there's no video for me to then monitor the questions. And I think if I were trying to type and listen, it would be a disaster. So Laura is going to monitor the chat session, and probably around 7:45, we'll jump to the questions and Laura will hand them off to us. So if you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to enter them there. And that's where we'll catch them and catch up at the end. So Lindsay, I just wanted to ask you, kind of what's the origin story for this book, or how did your project go? What was sort of the timeline for it? And just if you're willing to kind of start just with that would be great.
I'm thinking to myself, well, how long do you have? Because it's kind of a long story. It really all started. So I've been working on the book since 2018. That was when the idea kind of took hold of me, I would say. And then I worked on the proposal for about 6 months, and then had sold the book in early 2019. So was working on it in earnest since then. So when I think back to how it started, I immediately just go right back to my kitchen. I think that, so I have two daughters, they're 5 and 8. And I've always loved to cook, but after I became a mom, I started to realize how my relationship to cooking was changing and how much more time I was spending in the kitchen. And I'm also an artist and illustrator. And when I have questions that are sort of cycling around in my head about what something means to me, I tend to take them into my studio to try to work them out, whether I do it consciously or unconsciously. And this was a little bit of both. I found myself asking questions about sort of the intersections that I was noticing between the creative parts of cooking and why I was continuously drawn back to those things in cooking every day. And then also just sort of the aesthetic parts of cooking and what compelled me about them from an illustration point of view. And that was the first layer. And then I was also thinking a lot about my multiple roles as a mom and a professional and an artist and a friend and all the things, and balancing all of the different parts of my identity. And I just sort of started talking to a lot of the women in my own life about it. I also happened at the time, my family and I lived in the Bay Area, which, as you know, is totally a food mecca. There's so much amazing food there. There's so many amazing people and food in the area. And one of my friends had been a chef, and then she also became an accountant and she worked at an accountant for one of the more well-known restaurants in San Francisco. And we were talking about this like literally over a play date with our kids one time. And she just said, yeah, there are so many women that would want to talk about that, about these topics. And so really the whole process was kind of unfolded organically, and it happened through my own reflections and then sort of letting the questions unfold in my life, which is when I think about what really inspires me as an artist, it's all of those things. It's what's happening in my daily life. It's what I'm working on in my studio. It's the conversations that I'm having with my peers and the people around me and my environment. And then I was lucky enough to sort of, through those conversations, all of these other conversations started to unfold. So I started looking into these questions for myself, and then trying to take a deeper look at why I was asking them. And in that process, I learned a lot that I didn't know before about how underrepresented women have been in the culinary world. And that just kind of inspired me even more. And so then I took my questions that were sort of like in my own circle, and I expanded them and started cold calling chefs, food writers. I had the luck of being able to go to a couple of really important events in the Bay Area at the time, one with La Cocina, which is an amazing organization that supports low-income food entrepreneurs, many of whom are women. And then another at the Culinary Institute of America in Napa. And I got to hear a few people speak, and I just started thinking there's just so much here to explore. So the research process really unfolded pretty naturally.
And so did you then, as you were finding people that you wanted to include, was that list kind of ever growing? And I guess what I'm asking is, there's so many different facets to this book. So did you ask everyone sort of the same questions and then take those answers and sort of fit them in different ways? Or, did you know that you were going to go to one person for one thing and another person for another thing? Or sort of how did that like map out for you?
It was a little bit of all of those things that you just described. For example, there are chefs in the book who have also written a fair amount, or food writers who've also been recipe developers. So I kind of looked at the experience that people had and approached them. I knew that I wanted to have multiple kinds of content through the book. So there are essays, there are a series of short essays called Memorable Meals. There are about 11 recipes, one of which is yours. There are some Q&As, and then I wrote some profiles about people for a series of kitchen portraits. So from the beginning, it was sort of the biggest goal to me was to have the most inclusive group of voices that I could muster. And so that included looking at people's geographic locations, their experience, what they were doing, what they'd written about before, if they had written before. So it was a real mix. And actually in having those conversations with people, because so much of my research was just straight up cold calling people and being really persistent on email. It was interesting because like we would start the conversation, and in that interaction, we would get to know each other a little bit more, or we would talk on the phone, or I would interview them. And then I would sort of pitch some ideas, or they would pitch some ideas, and then they'd go away and think about it for a few days and come back. So over the course of the beginning phases of the month, it really, or the beginning phases of the book, it really was sort of like a conversation, which I think is important in terms of how you approach the book now, because the whole book feels like a conversation to me. So that really was part of it from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I found so interesting about it, is that I have not sat down and read it from start to finish, but I've really just sort of like dipped in and dipped out and like kind of flip open a page, and then it's like, oh, there's this amazing piece with Hilla Upgahuk, and like, all of these voices that I have heard over the years in the food world, but I'm just starting to learn about their work. But the other thing I really appreciated is how I'm really fascinated and fixated on this idea of the hidden work that goes into food, like all of the jobs along the food chain that nobody knows about. So it's like, we know that there are farmers, and we know that there are chefs, and we know that there are eaters, but there's like so many jobs along that spectrum. And I was thinking mostly about Celia Sack when I was reading through her, but Celia owns a bookstore in San Francisco called Omnivore, and she is just this like incredible champion of authors and cookbook authors specifically, and she has a large vintage section too. But just thinking of even about like what the kind of marketing, or like where your book is going to land afterwards, is something that I feel like nobody really thinks about as being a job. And so it really felt like there were voices represented both all over the country, all across the ethnic and cultural representations, different parts of the world, and then also just different jobs that people don't always see.
Yeah, and I think that that's absolutely right. I think that another goal from the beginning was that I wanted to hopefully achieve sort of a balance of some of the more well-known voices in food, and then voices that perhaps are new to people. And it's been so fun now that the book is out in the world, because even people that I would assume already know about everybody because of what they are doing in the food world, have in sending me messages and things in the last week, have told me I'm learning so much about people that I didn't know, which is shocking to me, because I feel like I'm not part of the culinary world. And when I approached this project, that was a big part of my, I was really nervous, to be honest, going into it. I didn't know if people would be interested in talking to me. Nobody knew my name, or I hadn't written anything that was relevant to most of the people in the book. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was that part of this process really also deepened the experience for me, because it really felt like developing relationships and friendships, and the whole community was so welcoming. Like, everyone I talked to was so welcoming.
I think that that's a really interesting facet, because I mean, everyone should know, like, Lindsay and I didn't know each other before she emailed me about this book. And I remember getting your email and just being like,
who is this lady?
No, the opposite. The opposite was I was like, who is this lady? But also, like, how did she get my name? Because like the email was like, there's Alice Waters and Renee Erickson and like Tanya Hall and all these people. And I was just like, why are you emailing me? But then it was just such a flattering thing to have. I think what you're saying about like kind of having that conversation, I think everyone feels sort of grateful when someone is interested in what you're doing, and it's easy to kind of forget that. I mean, I don't know. It's like you just end up doing your work a lot. And so all of a sudden there's somebody who's like, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. And that feels really great. But then at the same time, it did, we have now developed a friendship. And, the fact that, I mean, it helps that you're from Michigan. But but at the same time, it's just been such a nice sort of rapport. And I was thinking about that with just I don't think it's exclusive to women, because I've worked for really wonderful men in the food world too. And so I don't want it to be a strictly gendered thing. But I will say that my friend Sarah Rinkovich and I she was the chef, the CDC at Lula Cafe and Marisol in Chicago for a while. And she and I did a series called the Chicago Women's Brigade. And it was just like rotating series of dinners that involved female chefs and pastry chefs. And we were talking, the reason we started doing that series was because we're like, we see all the same guys at every event that we do. And so we're like, let's do our own event and like have the people that we want to see. And it was like, we don't know some of these folks, but we want to get to know them. And the easiest way, I think most people in kitchens are probably pretty introverted. That's why we like being in the back. And so it's like, it's nice to have those get to know you while your hands are busy and while your mind is sort of like, I always think about like, there's things at the forefront of my brain and there's things in the back of my brain. And when I'm like cooking, I feel like my front of my brain can be taken up with whatever I'm chopping or whatever, but it sort of frees up the back of my brain, which it was just such a nice way to get to know each other. But then this amazing thing happened, which was that everyone stayed and cleaned. And I had never worked an event where everybody stayed and cleaned. Usually it's just like, my dish is done, I'm out, sort of thing. And so Sarah and I were talking about that and just how like supportive everyone was. Like, somebody dropped a pan and it was like, okay, quick, everybody's scrambling to help like get that dish fixed. It's not like, oh, your dish is now screwed for this event.
Right.
And so we didn't like talk that much about it, but we started sort of thinking about it. We kind of mentioned it to each other. And then we did another one of these dinners and the same thing happened. And so I'm not at all surprised to hear that this like project started out of conversations with in people's kitchens about why they cook, what they're cooking, what that means for their lives, but then also kind of grew into this larger community of people who were, I think now we're all invested in your success because, it's like you're a part of that group. And it's just, again, it's just nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, especially when you talk about sort of what's happening in your brain in that moment, I think for me, a lot of what really inspired me and brought me to the project in the beginning was my creative process also. And I felt like there were so many overlaps between that and what chefs are doing, or anyone who makes food is doing. And I think that I brought those questions to those conversations. And so that might have been like another layer of intrigue that made people interested in engaging the conversation at all, was that I sort of, I think people were curious about why someone would, with an art lens, would want to look at those questions that way. And so, and I still think that that is like so inspiring. I could write a whole nother volume of this book thinking about that. And then I think also, to your earlier point, from my outsider's perspective, thinking about what sort of is shaping the culinary world in this moment, and the women who are writing a new narrative in the culinary landscape, that from my perspective included all of these people, like food writers, activists, Celia Sack, and it also included, and which I just bookmarked her, or I opened up this page. This is Celia. This is my illustration of her. And this is in her home library.
Oh, really? I thought it was in Omnivore, because it's amazing how similar it looks to, Omnivore's space too.
Yeah, they look, they do feel very reminiscent of each other. And she has an insanely amazing collection in her own home. And she is like a walking library. But it also included to me the voices of home cooks who are, equally part of this landscape. And that was my perspective that I was coming to the conversations with as well. And so in 2019, I made a survey that went out to, I think almost 400 people took it. I don't know if anyone here tonight took it. But because that also, I feel like there is this conversation with the women that are in professional culinary world jobs, and then also home cooks, and how we're all part of this big landscape together. And so that was also important to me to include.
Which feels extra important with a cookbook. And my friend Tim and I talk about this a lot, that so often cookbooks are written by food professionals and they don't translate to a home kitchen. And I think it's had this really sinister sort of effect, which is that, and I think tied with the rise of Food Network and celebrity chef culture, is that it's as if home cooks, which is predominantly women, have had to cede this authority to another. And so it's like, the number of times people will say to me well, is this good? And it's like, well, I don't know, taste it. Does it taste good to you? Does it feed your family tonight? Then it's good. There's no other metric for it. And sure, there are other metrics when it's your job or your profession, or you're being judged on a cooking show, but that's really different from everyday life. And it really is heartbreaking to me when it feels like the industry that I'm in is making people feel bad, or making them feel less than.
Instead of feeling empowered by the resources and knowledge that is out there, and being able to sort of take that knowledge and do what they need to do with it.
Totally. And I think empowered is exactly the right word, because why else are you writing a cookbook? If it's if you're writing a book about look at how great I am, that's a different type of book. That should not be a cookbook, because the idea is that a cookbook is what people are using in their homes to replicate something. And as someone who doesn't tend to cook from recipes, I find that very challenging, and is a very it's a really heavy part of the writing process, because for me, it's so much about riffing. Even tonight, I didn't have sunflower seeds, so I used pumpkin seeds. I I didn't have butter lettuce, so I'm using a red romaine that's got roughly the texture, all of those different things. And that feels so second nature, but that can be really I don't know what's the right word. It makes people not feel included, or if they don't have that same knowledge, that then somehow they're going to make the wrong decision. And that feels
which is one of the reasons I love your cookbook, which is because I feel like there are so many, it's the way that you wrote it, and it's also the way that you structured it, but there are so many points that are practical and useful. Like even on your last class that I got to sit in on a couple weeks ago, when you said, if your garlic is sprouted, it's okay. That's just part of what it wants to do. That doesn't bother me. Like it's just, that's what it's meant to do. And
nothing's wrong with it.
that doesn't, there's nothing wrong with it. And I was reading back about, I'm going to quote your salad chapter, because I thought as I was preparing salad tonight, I was thinking about how this is so spot on. But you said, for food to be positively memorable, it has to enchant to at least a small degree, potentially a tall order for a bag of lettuce. A perfect salad is enthralling, delightful, and never an obligation. And I think that when you write about your experience with vegetables and farming, and how you learned how to use vegetables in so many different ways and all of the parts, and that really gave you the foundation for what you're doing now. I mean, I think there is a lot of practicality built into that. And yeah.
It's interesting because that chapter, the salad chapter, when I started writing it, I was thinking about how in some ways what we're doing as chefs is akin to entertainment. My husband's a musician. We have friends who work in the arts, and it feels like, oh, that's the thing about restaurants, is that it's entertaining. And so it's like but I also feel like that translates to our home meals, which is that, at least in my family, I grew up in a family of eaters, and I have friends who are like, oh, we basically eat so that we don't die. And I was like, oh, that's not how my family lives. And so it was about trying to distinguish. And what I thought you were going to say is there's a line in that chapter, which I've been given a hard time for, which is that a bad salad pisses me off. And it does, because it's like, there's such beautiful ingredients and it should be exciting, but when it's bad, it just feels like such a letdown. But that's another one of those times where I was like, is this going to make people feel better? Like if I go to someone's house, are they going to be like, is the salad bad? Is she going to get all pissed off?
No, I think to me that really speaks to something that is crucially important in home cooking, which is that it is joyful. Yeah. I mean, there has to be an element of joy, and sometimes it's just not that. And I think that that was one of the really big reasons that I wanted to include women home cooks and what they really were thinking about cooking, because we don't really get to share our opinions that way in a book often. And the women, at least a lot of the women in my life, are balancing so much. And I feel like there's sort of this unspoken code of like, it's okay to say that you don't want to cook dinner.
Yeah, totally.
You can love cooking and you can love food, and you cannot want to cook dinner, and it's okay.
It's also okay to hate cooking. And that's the thing too, is I feel like, and that's what gets into some of the gender nature of, what gets talked about in your book too, is like, there's this idea that it's just women's jobs to cook. And like my sister, I mean, she's a good cook. I don't know that she loves it. And I remember she and I, we were having some sort of fight, and I was just like, Sally, you don't have to do this. Like, you're accomplished in all of these other ways. Like, you can let it go. And it was so representative of this fact that there's all these shoulds in the world. And I feel like, women should make dinner and should enjoy it and should reap the benefits of like people being joyful at their tables. And it is really nice when people are joyful at your table, and it is really nice to feed people, but if it's not your thing, it's fine, and right. I think that's something too. But I will say, if nobody takes anything else away from this conversation, I think one of the best things, the way to make yourself a really great cook and a really great hostess is just like never act like it's not what you wanted it to be, or that bothers you. Like, I've definitely made stuff, like I've burned some stuff and still served it, or been like, yeah, sorry guys, that toast is like really burned. But if you are like stressed about it, it makes everybody else stressed on your behalf. And I feel like that's something that I think the professional world has sort of taught you, is there's always a way to fix it. And also, like, pour people another glass of wine and no one's gonna care, no one. And also, if you have friends that go home and are like, can you believe she burned that toast? Like, you don't want those people as your friends.
It's really interesting because I've obviously, like, I'm sure a lot of people have been thinking about this over the last year, and with the gap in being able to host friends and have friends over for dinner and entertain at all. I think another thing I've been thinking about as the book has come together is just sort of what that all means and how we entertain, and how food is a part of that.
Yeah.
And I think that what you just said really nails it, which is food is a segue for so many things. It's a segue for conversation. And if you're the type of person that loves to get together with someone and cook together, that's another way that it can connect, right?
Yeah.
But it's like the open door. It's the door to so many other things. And I think that you're absolutely right. Like, if the toast is burned, that wasn't the point of the gathering.
Right.
And I think that's really stood out to me this year. I've been thinking about how my own cooking has shifted through writing the book and through the pandemic, especially. And I think that one thing that makes me really proud, actually, is that I've sort of let go of this idea that I have to be one kind of home cook, that, like, I have to just embrace it at all times, or that it fits into my identity in one way, whereas really it's fluid and it's always changing. And that is actually why I love it.
Yeah.
So I hope that people, in reading other people's perspectives on those questions, feel some sort of connection, that like they're not the only one that cooks 90% of the time, but only really likes doing it 25% of the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's
whatever.
interesting too, the other thing I took from flipping through the book this last couple of weeks was my friend Nick Tyson, who's one of the owners at Farm Club. He and I were talking about how we feel sort of creatively stagnant in some ways because we're not cooking for other people. And so, like, if I'm going to cook just for myself, like, it's like a snack stick and like a piece of cheese and some burnt toast, and so it's like, it's really when other people are coming over that I'm like, oh, I could try this thing, or I want to learn this thing. And he was saying he felt the same way. And so there was this thing that we've never examined sort of where the creative inspiration comes from, and how we both were really missing dinner parties, because that's where we try stuff out. That's where we, sort of dig into a book in advance, because it is sort of that, like, you get to put on a little bit of a show, and that's really nice.
Definitely.
And so I felt really filled from reading the book and sort of getting to do that with people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that is something where home cooks and professional chefs overlap, is that there is this sort of the sharing of food, and being in connection with other people in it is such a huge part of it. So when you take that away, or you're, cooking for the same two people, I mean, I love my family, but I'm cooking for them every day. And actually our roles have really equaled out in this last year, which is wonderful. And I love it. But like, when it's the same every day and there isn't sort of a new combination or chemistry of people that you are diving into a new book, or doing a potluck, or whatever it might be, it does take away a lot of that experience. And you're not the only one that I've heard say that, especially in the last few months. I mean, I think that fatigue is real.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll get vaccinated and we can all just throw a big fat dinner party soon.
But it's going to be great.
Yeah, it will be. I wanted to pivot the conversation just a little bit because it's about 7:35, so we've got about 10 minutes left before we go to questions. And I mostly just wanted to hear more about how the illustrations happen. I'm so fascinated by how illustrations integrate with a book in this way. And part of it is that Lucy Engelman was the illustrator with Roughage, and
like the getting to witness the conversations between the director of design and Lucy about like how like the technical side of it was so fascinating to me. And I was just wondering if, and your illustration and work is so different from Lucy's, and so it's like this thing that is sort of the same but totally different. And I was wondering if you could just sort of give kind of an overview of like how your sort of illustrating process happens, and what's the sort of like creative side to it, and what's the sort of just like job side to it, like the like technical, like, oh no, it actually just has to fit on this page, you know, kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Those are great questions. So this project, I would say, has been unlike anything I've ever done before from the standpoint of being so involved in the content of the book. I've illustrated other books, but I haven't written and illustrated a book, and I have certainly not been in collaboration with this many people. There are 112 women in the book, and then also home cooks. And so just managing the research and the development of that content over time, and then also thinking about what the book was going to look like and how it was going to function. And you know this from making your book and working on your forthcoming books, that like how the book is put together has a lot to do with how someone takes it in. Yeah. And that was all new to me, to think about that and how those pieces fit together. So it was really important for me for the reader to be able to jump in at any point. So you can open a page and there could be a full page illustration. There could be a recipe, and then you go to the next page and it's an essay. And there is a flow, like a sequence that was very thoughtful in terms of how I put that puzzle together. But I wanted there to be a lot of variety so that that the art would be prominent, that there would be a lot to look at, and that you could sort of pick it up at any point and find a place to dive in. And one of the great things about being involved in the writing and the art was that as I was finalizing the manuscript, I did all the art in the book I did as sketches first. So everything that's there was actually, I worked really closely with the designer, whose name is Sarah Smith. She was amazing, to lay everything out. Like each spread was laid out with the text and the image as a sketch. Okay. So that when it came time to illustrate everything fully, it was like a map. And I knew
the dimensions and everything.
Yeah, so I knew where I was, like if an illustration was going to span both full pages of the book, I knew that I would make it that big or that wide. So that was interesting. And by the time I got to doing all those final illustrations, I think we had just gone into lockdown. So I made the bulk of the final paintings for the book during the pandemic, which was intense and also completely wonderful, because it gave me something that I keep calling the experience of illustrating this book like the icing on the cake, because that's where it all started for me, of course, but getting to see the sort of content of the book develop over a couple of years, and then getting to bring my imagery to those stories after getting to know all of the people was just so satisfying and amazing. It felt really collaborative, and yeah, so it was really wonderful to be able to actually focus on that during the pandemic. And I mean, it was definitely hard at times with everything else that was going on, but it felt really nice to have something so specific to work on.
What an amazing way to connect with people when we like suddenly were kind of confronted with not doing that.
Totally.
And like having something to do, you know, and not just doom scroll the whole time. So
yeah. And I don't know, I guess like I'm not sure I answered your questions about the creative process, but it was hard to pick which part of people's stories to illustrate. There's so much stuff in these stories. I mean, I could have picked, multiple points for everyone.
Do you feel like the illustrations in this book are different from, like, do you normally do work that's sort of across the spectrum of styles? And was this like a particular choice? Do you feel like that was affected by the fact that you were illustrating at the start of lockdown? Like, I guess I have two questions. Like,
That's an interesting
did you
question.
make that choice deliberately, and or do you feel like doing that work during the pandemic sort of showed up in the work itself?
I think a little bit of both. I think that I had a vision. Well, let me back up. I think that my work is changing all the time. I think most artists would say the same thing, that your work is kind of constantly in flux. And I think that for different needs, for different freelance projects, I certainly have like different modes that I work in, whether it's more abstract or more detailed and realistic. I think that what was really important to me with this book from the beginning was really honoring every person's story. And so for me, that looked a certain way. And it was in the sketching that I developed that vision. And I could sort of, all my sketches were in pencil, and I could imagine exactly what that was going to look like in color. But of course, you know, working with another person who doesn't know
Right.
you or know what your vision is, like there's a lot of communication in that. And so I could imagine sort of these big, vast, you know, colorful paintings, and she was working with a black and white sketch. And I think that color was a big part of that vision for me, because that's such a huge part of food and cooking. And that's a big part of where I see connection between the creative processes that inspire chefs and that get me really inspired.
Yeah, we read and read with our eyes, eat and
Yeah.
eat with our eyes. So yeah. And then this is like a really sort of dumb technical question, but I'm really fascinated by like color palettes. So is that something where did you have to like decide on a palette for the entire book and then kind of keep that throughout? Is that something that just like naturally happens?
Yeah, it's something, I mean, I think there are definitely illustrators who work that way, where you might work with a limited palette for a certain project, but this was like no holding back. Everything is every color. And I was really lucky to work with a publisher who also shared that vision, you know, full color printing. And they really honored my wishes for the book, which were that the storytelling came through in the art also. And so they were totally on board with that. And that was one of the wonderful things about working with Workman.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me in thinking about how you convey a feeling through different ways, like if it's through design or, you know, I think about the restaurants a lot, that like the way the dining room set up, it has to work with the style of food. Otherwise it feels disjointed, but maybe nobody quite knows why they feel uncomfortable in that space. And I thought it was so amazing to see so many faces and so many voices from across so many different parts of the food world come together in a way that felt cohesive, but still felt like it really, it didn't feel samey the whole time, you know? And so it was just like that, I think was like, is sort of magic from the outside looking in, but.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
So final question before we jump to question and answers from other folks is, it's a two-parter. What do you feel like you learned from the process of bringing this book into the world? And then what do you hope people take away from it?
Great questions. I mean, I learned so much in every single way you could imagine. I learned about the process of making a book. I learned about myself as a writer. I learned about collaboration. I learned about the specifics of people and what people are doing in the culinary world, which is endlessly fascinating. And I think that, I mean, there are amazing people in this book, and it feels like it's just scratching the surface, which is both wonderful and also like crazy to think about how much more there is, like how many women there are in the world doing incredible work all over the place, whose stories we just haven't heard. So that's like inspiring and interesting. I think that makes me feel like I just want to keep learning. And so I think that is the thing that I take away from it. And actually, I think that's the thing that I hope people take away from reading it also, is that that I think food is, like I said earlier, a gateway for asking so many questions, not only of ourselves, but our communities and things that we don't know about. Yeah. And I think it's just such a connecting element in our lives that way, that I hope that people take the opportunity to learn something new, and then in a dream scenario, that it inspires them to keep doing that, outside of this book.
Yeah, that's interesting. Kim Severson of the New York Times, who is just like one of the smartest people in food and in journalism and in food, but also is just like wickedly funny. She always says, like, every headline in the paper, it's like there's always a food angle, and if it's food touches everything, and so it touches climate change, it touches immigration policy, it touches the economy, it touches equal pay and labor rights and all those different things. And as you were talking, I was just like, I want you to write a book that's about women in food that nobody's ever heard of. The like women who are making food in Midwestern church basements and making food in, like farm settings in the South, or like whatever it is. There's so many things. And I think it's just, to put shine on people who don't get the polish from our society feels like such a gift. And I think food is another like beautiful way to enter into that, because the people I feel the most inspired by are the folks who are like stretching their dollars to feed their families, and doing it on little time and all those sorts of things too. I feel like as chefs, we're all kind of posers, because we get to we work with food like minimum 8 hours a day, and it's often more than that. And so it's sort of an unfair thing. But when you're doing that on top of another job and raising kids and all of these things, there's so much that goes into that. And I feel like it creates this incredible like creativity and ingenuity to just make it work, so anyway.
Yeah, there are so many stories yet to be told, and I think that's really exciting. I mean, I think I want people to turn the last page of this book and be like, there's so much more. I want to find out.
Yeah. Well, and it's really amazing that we're having this conversation with, I know Scott Craig was on the call, and he wrote several series of books called The Story Next Door, and I think did it as a radio program too. He has a wonderful radio voice. But it was just that same idea that, there's always, everybody's stories are so fascinating. And the person who's living next door to you has their like entire history of stories and all of their family's stories and things like that, and people doing interesting things. So I think you really hit on that and really represent it well. So I think
thanks so much.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks again for talking with us and taking the time. And I think I want to kick it back over to Laura. It looks like I saw some questions pop up in the chat, but I couldn't actually read them. So Laura, what do people got?
I wanted to cut in line. Can I cut in line?
I mean, you don't even have to tell us that you're cutting. You should be like,
This is more a comment though, but I think like that was just listening to you guys. You could read this book and have a conversation with your family about like, what is your most memorable meal? Totally. What is your like family recipe that's like really at the heart of your family? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about that like that would be like a lovely way to continue this. Because
maybe I should make a workbook.
Yeah, those are stories. No, and also like, like highlighting grandmothers in church basements, like those recipes are like integral to like communities. Yeah. And so I think that could be a really neat way to just like sort of, I'm going to take that tidbit and sort of just start asking people like, what's your most memorable meal? So I decided to cut in.
I love that.
Somebody was asking how many recipes are there in the book?
There are 11 recipes in the book.
Okay. That's what they thought.
Yeah.
I am also wondering if folks who are here, because we didn't get to this, but Lindsay's living in Leland right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I wondered if you wanted to just jot in the chat, like, do you have a restaurant recommendation, or do you have a favorite farm, or do you have like a place you love to go to source ingredients? Like, if you have some, just to like welcome her to our community.
I have to say, I made Abra's chicken tonight with a local chicken, with the ends of my bread from Nine Bean, and winter market tomatoes from Oriana, and local buttermilk from, I forget, somewhere. And I feel like 80 to 90% of what I ate was local,
which is funny.
Pretty cool.
Because we were talking about these recipes and I was like, well, tomatoes, that was why we had the tomatoes. And it was like, you know, they're not going to be like super local unless, I don't think TLC does hydroponics through the winter anymore, but it was just like, sometimes you have to buy non-local stuff. So the fact that it's still like 90% local is just amazing.
It's kind of amazing. I have to say, coming from California, I have been pleasantly, like, I grew up in Michigan, I should say, so this is not new to me, but like all of my stereotypes that I had about leaving California produce and coming back home have been broken.
Yeah, people in California don't have to find something else to do with kohlrabi in February.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody was asking how you found a publisher, Lindsay.
Oh, good question. So I worked with a wonderful agent who helped me make my proposal worthy of being in front of publishers, which was super important because I had never tried to publish my own book before. And so I learned a ton in that process, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without professionals' help. And then she took the book to auction, and that's, the rest is history.
Yeah, I will chime in with that too. I had the same experience that I am represented by a literary agent, and she is like Virgil through the Inferno. Like without that, I think that there's really something to be said for people who kind of know the lay of the land and who are going to advocate for you. And if anyone who's on the call is thinking about publishing a book, Priya Krishna wrote a piece, I think back in 2019, I think it was June of 2019, about sort of predatory book offer practices. And that sounds like a made up thing, but it's not. It's because what it is that in cookbooks specifically, the author is responsible for the production of the book. So like for my books, I'm given in advance by the publisher, and then I hire the photographer and the illustrator, and I pay for all the food styling and for all of the food that's in the shoots and all that sort of stuff. And so what'll happen is that you'll have people who are trying to get into the food world, and they'll have like, you know, a successful blog or something like that, and a publisher will come to them, not necessarily the bigger name publishers, but some sort of offshoots of it, and say like, we're gonna, you know, we would love to publish your book and it's so great, and here's, you know, $1,500 or $4,000 or something like that, and then you're still responsible for all of those costs. And so people end up going really out of pocket on something that they're never going to recoup, and the publisher knows that they're never going to recoup it. And so I think it's always helpful to at least talk to an agent first, and just to vet it with other people in the industry too. So
Totally.
More information people need to know, but Priya Krishna's piece is really fascinating. She does a lot of great investigative journalism on food world stuff. That's not necessarily that.
She's also a contributor.
This is what I'm saying. It's just amazing. It's like everybody I've ever wanted to like, you know, reference or talk about just shows up on Lindsay's pages. So
she also has an incredible book called Indianish, which you should definitely check out. And her recipe in Why We Cook is also in Indianish.
Nice.
Somebody was asking where is your book going to be available at the library? I know that Mark has ordered it for Leland, and so hopefully it'll be here soon. We have Indianish too. Where can they get your book?
Oh, great question. It's available everywhere books are sold. totally love when people buy from their local bookstores. So I encourage you to do that. And you can always request your local bookstore to order it. You can also find links to get it at whywecookbook.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at Lindsay Gardner Art, and it's Lindsay with an A.
Laura, I actually have a question, and maybe this is more for Mark, who I know is like not unmuted right now, but as a library person, when someone comes in and asks for a book, is that A, nice, B, a hassle, or C, indifferent?
Mark, unmute.
Yeah, we love suggestions, especially if something's new. When somebody suggests a book, I'll check the reviews right away, and 9 times out of 10 I will order it, because if one person is interested in it, usually more will be.
Yeah.
Unless it's 10 years old, and sometimes they don't even realize it. They just heard about it and they suggest it, and I'll say, well, it was published 10 years ago. We can get that through interlibrary loan for you, and then that's fine. But we love suggestions.
Yeah, I'm actually known for saying, hey, Stacy, will you please recommend some cookbooks that we should like, that you really love? Will you please recommend it? Or like there's another patron who's here tonight who I just recently, we takes a lot of cookbooks home. We're like, oh, well, just tell us which ones are great, because it's really hard to know about everything, right? Sure. So yeah, we love recommendations. Like, particularly if you like graphic novels. I don't know anything about graphic novels.
Nor should you.
We love but speaking of books, there's one that just kind of in your conversations, like one book that I've been reading. It's called The Art of Gathering.
Oh yeah.
Have you heard about it?
Yep. Who is the author?
It's Priya Parker's book.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually, this is a great book to read right now for like post-COVID gatherings. I'd really recommend it. She seems really wonderful.
And
I also had some. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, I've also had some really fascinating conversations with people recently about how they're cooking through the pandemic and their creativity has blossomed in different ways. I mean, it's kind of both ends of the spectrum, I think, for people cooking right now. And I think I think it is wonderful when you hear about people coming up with all these ways to connect with people through food, even though they can't be together. I shared a story recently about how I take part in a amazing Seder every year. And this year we couldn't do it. And I was still in California at the time. So we potlucked and shared the food, but then we got together virtually, and it was so special and memorable. So I think there are nice workarounds given the circumstances.
Yeah, and that's something too. I mean, just as we're kind of getting near to the end of this time, I think what you're both saying, both about like, kind of creative ways to connect with each other, and also sort of how libraries continue to function as this resource, even when you're not physically in the library. You were saying, like, asking people, like, what are your recommendations for this? Because somebody else might be interested. But then, like, the sheer number of people I know who check cookbooks out of the library to test drive them before buying them. And, that is such a service that's really being provided. And I think that it's just fascinating to me, sort of, especially in a rural area, how libraries function as a source of literacy, but also as a source of connectivity, and feeling really grateful that, there's all of these sort of new tools for that. And so I'm really glad that it's not annoying to have people come in and ask for books. So I was like, as I was asking that question, I was like, oh no, what if it's terrible? And it's just like, oh no, all the things I asked somebody at the library for, they actually secretly hated me. So I'm glad that that's not the case.
Like, on a personal side, like, just because so much of our life is online right now, I really, really enjoy cooking out of a cookbook.
Interesting.
Following a recipe out of a cookbook. I just really, that's what I
just
want.
Like the tactile nature of it.
Yeah, well, I think because also I have 2 children, and so like if I'm on my phone looking at a recipe, they're like, then I'm on my phone more. But if I'm looking at a book, then I'm reading. I don't know. I think that's like that's been important to me during this. I wanted to ask, Lindsay, will you tell us about some other events that you're going to have around your book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay, next week, Abra and I will be talking at Literati in Ann Arbor. So
Taking the show on the road.
yeah. So hopefully some
Wait,
of
and you guys both need to
come
eat
to
more.
that.
You need to eat a little bit more. We were joking earlier before we started talking
know.
how awkward it can be to eat salad while trying to talk to people. How you get that like it all in your.
I definitely haven't ever eaten in front of this many people.
Okay, so next week. Okay.
So Literati is next week. I also have an event that I organized called Why We Cook Home Cooks 1 year later, which I totally invite anyone who's here tonight to join, which is basically an ongoing conversation about some of the things that we talked about tonight with a panel of home cooks who participated in the book.
Cool.
So that you can find via links on the website and in Instagram. And it's free. I do suggest a donation to Abundance Setting, which is an amazing organization in Chicago that's helping women in the culinary industry who are mothers, and they help actually cook meals for women who are chefs. So that's wonderful. What else? There's going to be a lot more coming up in April, May. So yeah.
Okay. And then Abra we're going to continue on with these, and our next event with Abra will be on Monday, April 12th. So stay tuned for more.
Yeah. Which we're really excited about. So Lindsay, thanks for being our test run and guinea pig on this. So everyone, I just wanted to say too, we were so floored by the response for both tonight and then the previous series that we wanted to figure out a way to continue that programming. And so I think the format that we're doing tonight is what we're going to replicate the second Monday of every month, except for, I think we might take June, July, and August off because we all want to be outside. And so the idea is that, we'll have different authors coming through, cook something from their book and then chat about it. So,
and then on that note, I actually wondered if you guys had, in cooking the recipes tonight that you made for tonight, do you have any tips for folks?
Are you asking us?
I'm asking you.
I can't really chime in because I just made it, and
riffed on it, which I think is important to know, because I think everybody is still doing a little bit of COVID riffing, right? Right. I don't have sunflower seeds. I only have this, Right.
I used
it was very good and her kitchen smelled amazing.
It was amazing. I can't wait to eat the rest of it. I think that let's see. What?
Off screen.
Yeah, off screen. I used the ends of my 3-day-old bread, which I loved. I felt very satisfied that this delicious bread was going to good use. And I was impressed by the winter tomatoes, actually.
Oh, good.
I was not expecting them to be.
I feel impressive. Cherry tomatoes are more forgiving than the big slicers generally.
Yeah. Nice. And also, I have not made a spatchcock chicken that way, and it was so easy.
It's one of my favorite ways to cook. Usually chicken or anything that you want to keep that crispy skin. It's sort of like an uncovered braise. So you're getting, for those of you who have just maybe flipped through the recipe, the idea is that you take a chicken, you spatchcock it, which is just cut the back out of it and then flatten it out. And the reason for that is because it'll cook twice as fast because it's in a single layer. So you get more even heat distribution or heat penetration of the meat. So then you sear the bird to get the skin crispy. But then you just so skin side down to sear it, pull it out, and then you build everything else into the frying pan. So again, I don't have the recipe memorized, but what I would do is kind of deglaze it with something acidic, like if it's white wine or something like that. I love cooking it over day-old bread. It's another way to use up kind of all of those heels of bread that I refuse to eat as toast. And so the bread just gets torn up inside of it, and then the cherry tomatoes are added, some chicken stock, and then you just put the chicken skin side up now on top of the bread and then put it in the oven. And what'll happen is that the chicken stock will bubble and steam. And so you're cooking the chicken from underneath with the steam, but then the chicken skin is staying crispy because it's exposed to the dry heat of the oven. And so you get those two textures. So it's really juicy meat and then really crispy skin. And it's a one pot thing. It's like super easy. The recipe that's in Roughage for potatoes, it's like a mustard braised potatoes, is the same idea. But it's nice to do it with a whole bird, and it's also nice to do it with bread instead of potatoes sometimes. But you could use anything. You could use carrots or parsnips or beans, I guess. I don't know, that'd be a lot of protein in one meal, but you know, things like that too. Or cornbread. I'll do it often because cornbread, you know, dries out so fast that I'll oftentimes put cornbread sort of in place of the regular bread, or a mix of all of it.
I also have to say the salad, which is included in Why We Cook, is so delicious. And I can't wait to make it with summer tomatoes.
You know, this is actually a shout out to Barb Peace Corps. I think she's still on. She was the first person who kind of tuned me into building salads in sort of larger platters and single layers. And so the idea is that, and I think I said this in the book too, that butter lettuce is such a tender lettuce. And this is often the case with real spring greens when they haven't been whipped around by the wind of summer yet. And so if you toss them with a dressing, they're just going to like poop out in the bowl. And so this is a way to kind of build it in layers so that then you're not tossing it and damaging those leaves, but then everybody gets an even distribution. So the idea is that you take these sort of delicate leaves, lay them out, and then scatter the roasted tomatoes or the fresh tomatoes if it's in the summer. And then there's a relish that's made with just like parsley, lemon, olive oil, and a little bit of garlic. And that just adds a depth of flavor to it too. So you kind of spoon that over, and then just straight buttermilk. And buttermilk is a really like old fashioned ingredient that I don't know, we always kind of have around, but it gets used like in pancakes and other things like that. But it's really great on its own too. And the way that it mixes with the cherry tomato and the lemon and the olive oil and the herbs, it's like creamy and tangy. And it's sort of like, maybe this is sacrilegious to say, but my favorite thing about getting a Whopper is when like you're eating it and like the tomato and the mayonnaise like mixes together and it kind of soaks into the bun. So that was the inspiration for it.
It's a Whopper salad.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are the two recipes for it. So.
Yeah. And also the textural elements of it are so great. I mean, it's like a little bit of everything, which is exactly like you say in your book. There's like a little surprise and a little bit of joy in there, which makes you really want to eat your salad.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Lindsay and Laura, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for
Thank
tuning
you.
in.
This was so fun.
So fun.
So fun.
Let's wave to everybody. I like to do the double wave.
Yeah. And we'll see everybody April 12th, right? That's our next.
We'll see you then, you guys. Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Sylvia. Nice to see you guys.